Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. We're here to discuss a very, very important topic, a critically important topic. Perhaps I would argue the most important topic facing not only the United States government, but facing the world community, and that's the topic of climate crisis. Before I begin, obviously see a whole host of folks behind me, but two in particular that you'll be hearing from very shortly. Abby McHugh-Grifa, who is the Executive Director at the Climate Solutions Accelerator, and a great friend who I have been privileged to be at a podium with several times to talk about the importance of the work we do both globally and locally. And Sarah Mittiga, who is the co-lead of Rochester Citizens Climate Lobby chapter, and they are great folks who have worked tirelessly to advance the cause that I'm going to talk about and the solutions that we believe can have a real lasting impact on our world community. So 5 years ago this week, the Paris Climate Accord was ratified, acknowledging the existential threat that the climate crisis poses to planet Earth and the dire need to curb our carbon emissions. More recently, a United Nations report showed without a shadow of a doubt that human activity is to blame for the alarming levels of carbon within our atmosphere, and that we are perilously close to the point of no return. And I strongly encourage anyone who has not seen the United Nations report to go online and read through it. It is frightening, the statistics, and it is frightening to point out the impact that mankind has had on our global community and global climate. Right behind me, Braddock Bay Park, the United States Army Corps of Engineers, recently completed a project that came as a direct response to human activity. The federal government, alongside state and local partners, spent millions of dollars bolstering this wildlife preserve to both stem the decades of erosion and protect the park against further damages that we collectively have caused. This park stands, in my view, as a wake-up call. The climate crisis is here in our own communities, and we must do better. The fate of our ecosystem, the fate of our children, our grandchildren, future generations, and the fate of our entire planet depends on it. That's why we are desperately in need of the investments my colleagues and I in Congress have advanced and the White House has advanced. Fighting the effects of this crisis is one of the top priorities for all of us. It's certainly my top priority, something I'm continuing to push for as we advance the Build Back Better agenda. No matter what, we need to invest in the Clean Electricity Performance Program to give the Department of Energy the teeth it needs to ensure providers are doing everything they can to transition to renewable energy. We need to modernize our grid, which is embarrassingly outdated, inefficient, and costs taxpayers billions of dollars each year. We need to electrify our transportation by investing in clean public transit and building the first ever national network of EV chargers across our country. We need investments that uplift our communities most impacted by the existential emergency and ensure environmental justice is at the forefront of our policies, particularly impacting communities of color. And we need the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which I am a proud co-sponsor of. It will not only incentivize companies to curb their emissions, but to empower American citizens who are quite literally paying the price for the damages fossil fuel consumption and companies cause. This is a critical piece of legislation that gets to the core of so much of our Build Back Better agenda, and I'll continue to advocate for it to be included in any infrastructure or Build Back Better Act that we pass in Congress. And I'm working very closely with my colleagues, Senator Ted Deutsch and Senator Wyden in the Senate, to try to advance this and move this to the forefront. The climate crisis is the defining issue of our time. How we respond to it will determine the fate of generations to come. All of the resiliency in the world, such as the resiliency we've built behind me, but all of it will not matter unless we target the root problem of this crisis. We must take bold, decisive action to save our planet, and we must do it now. I'll continue fighting every day to advance these measures in Congress and ensure we leave behind a healthy, clean, vibrant world for future generations. And I want to thank again the folks behind me who have done so much to educate me, whose time and patience, and more importantly, their dedicated and ongoing committed passion are making a difference in our world. And it's now my privilege to introduce Abby McHugh-Grifa, who holds a PhD in music education. And the reason I mention that is because Abby is so committed to this issue that she has literally given up her job teaching music to dedicate her career to addressing this crisis, and I don't know what demonstrates commitment more than that, but she's going to, in a very lyrical and musical way, describe to us why this issue is so important. So, Abby, please join me.
I'll just second everything he said, actually. I think we're pretty much in agreement about all of that. But hi, I'm Abby McHugh-Grifa, Executive Director of the Climate Solutions Accelerator. I thank you all for being here today, and of course, thank you, Congressman Morelle, for convening us and for your strong and consistent support for climate action. Climate action is a global crisis that is increasingly impacting the lives of people right here in the Genesee Finger Lakes region. We are already seeing an increase in extreme weather and vector-borne diseases, adverse health impacts due to heat exposure and air pollution, disruption to our energy grid and electricity, or rather agriculture system, and an influx of climate refugees from places that have experienced more serious climate-related disasters. But climate change is both a threat and an opportunity for our region. Successfully mitigating and adapting to the climate crisis will require rehabilitating our aging housing stock, dramatically improving our public and active transportation systems, repairing crumbling infrastructure, modernizing the electricity grid, and creating a sustainable food system. These actions create jobs, stimulate our local economy, and make our neighborhoods cleaner, stronger, healthier, and more resilient. Unfortunately, time is running short to take advantage of these opportunities. As the Congressman mentioned, according to a UN report from 2018, global emissions must drop dramatically by 2030 in order to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. A more recent report put this in even starker terms, describing how the impacts of climate change are accelerating and are in some cases irreversible. For me, the big takeaway of both of these reports is that we have no time to waste. We urgently need bold climate action now. So we know that we have less than a decade to dramatically transform our energy system and end our reliance on fossil fuels. And we're fortunate to live in a region that is rich with natural and human resources that we can leverage to achieve this. We have a strong local climate movement, as you see, of smart, committed advocates who are working hard to educate their communities about effective forms of climate action. We also have leaders like Congressman Morelle who understand the challenges we face and who are working hard to secure the financial resources we will need to transition away from dirty, harmful fossil fuels. We can successfully navigate this transition, but it will require coordinated strategic effort and massive investment. It is therefore essential that the Build Back Better agenda include bold provisions to reduce carbon emissions and advance an equitable, clean energy economy. It must also include funding mechanisms that match the scale and the urgency of the climate crisis. When it comes to addressing climate change, our window of opportunity is unfortunately closing. So now is the time for action. Now is the time to invest in solutions. And now is the time to push for a Build Back Better agenda that prioritizes climate justice and bold, ambitious emissions reduction goals. Thank you, Congressman Morelle, and all the rest of you for being here.
Thank you to Abby and for all the incredible work that she does. We have partnered together on a number of things, and I continue to be impressed with just the incredible passion that she brings and obviously all the knowledge that she brings to this. Let me now bring up Sarah Mittiga, who co-leads the Rochester chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby and works to curb this crisis all across Western New York. She also sits on the board of the Climate Solutions Accelerator. I'm delighted to ask her to the podium as well. Sarah?
Great. Thank you, Representative Morelle. My name is Sarah Mittiga, and I co-lead our local chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. First of all, we thank Congressman Morelle for his leadership on climate solutions and for inviting us here today. We are Citizens Climate Lobby. We're a grassroots, nonpartisan organization with over 200,000 supporters around the country, all laser focused on passing federal legislation to put a price on carbon. As citizens, our job is to create the political will for bold climate action. We do that here in Rochester by training and empowering ordinary citizens to lobby our elected officials for climate solutions. Over the last 8 years, hundreds of local volunteers have signed postcards, written letters to the editor, made phone calls, canvassed farmers markets, and met with our elected officials in Rochester and in DC, all with the same message. We need to go big on climate. We need to put a price on carbon. Why go big on climate? The past few months have painted us a horrible picture, from wildfires in the West to people drowning in their homes here in New York State. Climate change is an injustice multiplier. Every priority issue we face is made worse by climate change. And the IPCC report has made clear we need to rapidly reduce carbon emissions to prevent even worse impacts. In the words of the Secretary General of the United Nations, this is code red for humanity. So how do we go big on climate? Congress has committed to taking action on climate change in this year's budget reconciliation bill, the Build Back Better Act. By including a carbon price in this legislation, we can meet the challenge of reducing emissions 50% by 2030, and we can hit net zero emissions by 2050. Congress cannot pass up this opportunity to put us on the right path. We need to go big on climate, and we need to put a price on carbon. Why a price on carbon? A carbon price will save 4.5 million lives over the next 50 years by restoring clean air across the country, especially in communities of color who have unfairly borne the impacts of carbon pollution for far too long. A carbon price can put money in our pockets with a carbon cashback dividend to households to offset costs. A carbon price is simple and quick to implement. In Canada, fossil fuel companies were paying a carbon fee within 6 months of passage. A carbon price keeps the US competitive. Currently, the US is one of only 2 developed economies worldwide without a carbon price. And finally, a carbon price reduces emissions across the entire economy in a single stroke. This fall, let's go big on climate. Congressman Morelle, please know that you have a deep and broad base of support in our community to include a carbon price in the Build Back Better Act, and we commend your leadership for making that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I do want to say, I think it was back about 3 years ago when I first met with this group on the question of the tax and dividend bill, and I remember, and I'm sure many of them will remember, me asking a lot of questions, both the impact on the United States, but the impact as it relates to trading partners. And I just want to again thank the group behind me, because they worked so hard and so diligently to answer all my questions, to make sure that they made all the points that they thought were necessary. And I want to just underscore something that Sarah just said, because there is a tendency sometimes, I think, to look at the climate crisis and say, well, that's the polar ice caps are melting. It's a long way from where we are, or, you know, this will happen in 10, 15, 20 years. Why think about it now? But it's happening right now. If people don't think wildfires are related to climate crisis, they're wrong. If they don't think that the great frequency of flooding and tornadoes and all the natural disasters that we see happening now, 100-year events that are happening every 10 years, as the UN report points out, without any question, without any confusion, it's about the climate crisis. And so this is happening as we speak. And again, some of the effects are irreversible. We see the number of species being facing extinction. Some of them are already extinct because of the climate crisis, because of what we have done. So we are nearly past the point of no return, and I frankly can't even envision a world in where my children and my grandchildren are like some dystopian movie where they're worried about clean air and clean water and being able to walk outside and breathe. But this is what we will bring to those children and grandchildren if we don't act now, if we don't act forcefully, if we don't act boldly. And this is the opportunity. I also want to congratulate the President on the Build Back Better agenda, because he has placed a priority on clean energy, on the climate crisis, and he has said it over and over and over again. So we have to get together, we have to make this decision, And again, I want to thank my partners here who've done such a remarkable job and continue to spread the word and continue to have faith, having a sense of optimism, even though we know this is a great existential crisis of our time. So again, thank you all very much, and thank you all for being here.
On topics at the podium. On topic questions.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Mr. Morelle, for those who might be a bit, may have tuned out, maybe tuning back in, what's the difference between this and the Green New Deal?
Well, in terms of the specific question related to the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, or the whole package?
The whole package.
So a lot of it would be incorporated in the Green New Deal, or another package called the Thrive Agenda, which I co-sponsor, and it really seeks to do a number of different things. Certainly to address the climate crisis. Second is to make sure that we deal with this in a just way and bring economic justice to it. So I think these are specific proposals. The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act is a very specific piece of legislation which would tax carbon content and deliver dollars back to every household in America, which really benefits communities of color that feel the impact. So there are many elements of the Green New Deal which are included in what I've said. We've returned to the Paris Climate Accords, which we had dropped out of during the Trump administration. So this is just a specific list of items in getting on renewable energy, increasing our effectiveness and the efficiency of the electrical energy grid and distribution system. So these are all things that would be part of the Green New Deal.
And if this were passed, what would it look like here in Rochester or in the Finger Lakes area?
Well, hopefully across the country, what it will mean is we will enhance the grid, so greater distribution and transmission. If you keep moving towards electrification through renewables, you're going to need a much more robust electric energy grid. It will mean more research and investment and deployment of renewables, research in batteries and battery storages. Some of the limitations that we face, it will mean more money for the kinds of resiliency that I talked about. It will, if we pass the carbon tax, would make sure that those people who have carbon content in their goods and products would pay for that, and it would be on an increasing scale. So over time, we would really create significant incentives for people to move to non-fossil fuels to make their products. I think it does a whole host of things. We'll have to see, as we continue the negotiation, how much of this we can get done, both in the infrastructure bill that is essentially agreed to and waiting passage, as well as the Build Back Better Act. But this is going to be a priority in everything we do. So whether it's Build Back Better, infrastructure, our normal appropriations process, this has become the defining issue of our time.
I have more questions, but I don't want to
On topic?
still on topic.
Okay.
When you talk about removing ourselves from fossil fuels, does this also include plastics?
Yeah, and plastics are a huge problem, certainly in our oceans. But the great thing, and I should defer to people behind me, but just a couple of years ago, recycled plastics in the marketplace were actually more expensive than virgin plastic. That's changed now. There's a huge market for recyclable plastics. We'd like to make sure that products don't have plastics at all, and we'd like that's part of the zero emission, is to get rid of plastics, which obviously can only be produced with petroleum products. There are new ways of looking at materials that don't include petroleum products. We're doing things to try to take renewable husks and things out of nature and use them to make products. But that would mean dramatic reductions in plastics, and to use recycling to be able to just cut down on the creation of plastics.
I should have probably clarified. My question was more on the manufacturing, which I think you touched on.
Yeah, and they'd also have to pay, because it includes carbon. The carbon tax would apply to products that have plastic content.
Where does this legislation stand right now?
The legislation's been introduced. I'm a co-sponsor of the bill in the House, sponsored by my friend Ted Deutsch of Florida. But during the negotiation, which is when I'm trying to raise this in the conversation around what the revenue package would be in order to pay for the Build Back Better Act, Senator Wyden of Oregon has raised this on the Senate side. Congressman Deutsch and I are raising it on the House side. I want to say it's going to be a challenge. There are certainly members of the House and Senate who aren't entirely sold on this approach. But as I often say, if you really want to think about things that have had a tremendous impact on human behavior, it often is a result of taxation. And we did this around cigarette taxes, and we wanted to reduce consumption of cigarettes. So tax policy does have an impact on how people behave, and that's why it's so important.
I had a question for Sarah as well. Sarah, you mentioned about the carbon price
Yeah.
it could save. With the carbon price that you mentioned, you said it could save 1.5 million lives. Could you just clarify where you're getting
It was
your numbers
4.5.
from?
Yep, it was 4.5 million lives over the next 50 years, and that's by reducing air pollution. There's a statistic, I think 1 in 10 deaths are connected to air pollution, and by dramatically dropping carbon pollution, we're able to save a lot of lives that way.
From where though?
I did not know that, so
Look it up.
I apologize.
And that may not include the number of lives lost to hurricanes and flooding and wildfires. I'm not sure if it does.
No,
but,
it's just
is that what's that?
it's just breathing. That's just
Yeah, just breathing. So it's a respiratory disease and other issues which affect people's health. Any other questions? Thanks again for being here. Thank you to all of you.